Though, as we always do, keeping them honest, tonight thousands of U.S. servicemen and women are preparing to spend another holiday in Iraq and Afghanistan in harm's way. And thousands more are going to spend it here at home recovering from their injuries. Our lawmakers and our military officials talk a pretty good game when it comes to supporting the troops. Take a look.
It is time to treat our veterans with the dignity and respect they deserve.
The troops deserve our best.
The most fundamental thing that we could do to honor the sacrifices of our troops.
Those fighting to recover deserve respect for their sacrifice.
The sacrifices have been immense. Here's a number I want you to consider. Right now, at least 115,000 service members been injured with brain injuries since 2000. That's according to the Pentagon. It's a pretty big sacrifice for your country by almost any measure. And many believe the number of brain injuries is actually far higher. So keeping them honest, why is the Pentagon refusing to pay for a treatment many medical experts believe is the best type of rehab for traumatic brain injuries? It's called cognitive rehabilitation therapy. And I can tell you, as a practicing neurosurgeon who sees a lot of brain injuries, it's something that I recommend for many of my patients. It basically combines intensive speech and occupational therapy to help patients relearn everyday skills, like speaking, like paying bills, like cooking, driving. It's tailored to each patient's needs. At least 3 major private health insurers cover it: Aetna, Humana, United Health. But here's the thing. TRICARE, the health insurance plan for nearly 4 million active duty service members and retirees, a plan operated by the Pentagon, will not pay for it, which means tens of thousands of troops who have come home with traumatic brain injuries can't get this therapy unless they pay for it out of their own pockets. Now, to defend its position, TRICARE last year commissioned an assessment of available research. The study's conclusion was there isn't enough evidence that the therapy works. But it turns out that experts who reviewed TRICARE's study called it this: deeply flawed, unacceptable, even dismaying. An investigation by ProPublica and NPR uncovered confidential documents, including this letter by one of the reviewers. He wrote this, quote, "The authors failed to use any of the many widely accepted systems for grading the strength of a body of scientific evidence, and they failed to justify this action." He also said the authors ignored several widely accepted reviews of hundreds of studies that show the therapy actually does work. The conclusion reached consistently across them, he wrote, was that several forms of cognitive rehab are effective for individuals with TBI, traumatic brain injury. And he also said this: "I believe the review of cognitive rehabilitation conducted by the ECRI Institute, this particular institute, was unacceptable." Now, TRICARE is standing by the report it commissioned. We invited them to come on the program tonight, and they sent this statement instead. They said, quote, "The care and rehabilitation of our wounded service members is of utmost concern to the Department of Defense, the military services, and TRICARE. While many believe certain forms of cognitive rehabilitation are helpful, no single form has been adopted by the majority of rehabilitation professionals." They also said, quote, "More research is needed to support the effectiveness of cognitive rehabilitation and all severities of TBI." Now, I want to point out that just last year, the Pentagon convened a panel of 50 civilian and military brain specialists who concluded that this type of therapy is in fact effective and in fact would help many brain-damaged troops. Here's something else. More than a decade ago, a similar panel convened by the National Institutes of Health reached a similar consensus, and the Brain Injury Association of America also considers it effective. Here's one more thing you should know. Cognitive rehab is also expensive, costing between $15,000 and $50,000 per soldier. Keeping them honest, is cost a factor in this particular story? TRICARE says it's not. We're going to let you decide. I talked earlier to Paul Rykoff, Executive Director and Founder of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, and T. Christian Miller, Senior Reporter for ProPublica, who worked on its TRICARE investigation. So, Paul, let's get right to it. Brain injury is a signature injury of this war. We've been talking about that. I'm holding up a stack of studies here that show cognitive rehabilitative therapy is effective, yet many veterans aren't getting it. Why is that?
Well, right now, TRICARE is not paying for it, and I think that's a major problem. And I think what we've seen across the board is that the military medical delivery system has often been behind some of the newer injuries. And traumatic brain injury isn't something that most folks in the medical community were familiar with 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and it seems like there's a game of catch-up going on. But no matter what it costs, no matter what it takes, these men and women with traumatic brain injury need the help they deserve. That's got to happen immediately and without any kind of red tape or barrier.
I want to drill down on that point, though. TRICARE, obviously one of the insurance companies that provides care for veterans. You've been investigating traumatic brain injury for almost a year now in conjunction with NPR. What have you found about that specifically? What Paul is saying, TRICARE won't pay for it. What have you seen about that?
Yeah, Daniels Wordling of NPR and I have been looking into this, and one of the things that we were told is you got to find out, why does TRICARE not pay for cognitive rehabilitation therapy? It's one of the recommended treatments for brain injury. What we found is that TRICARE did a study in which they said there wasn't enough scientific evidence for this, so we just can't provide it to our troops.
Yeah, and I mean, there's literally hundreds of studies, and I've read through the studies I've showed you here, and I should say as well, as a neurosurgeon, I refer patients often for cognitive therapy. What struck me is if you follow the standards that I looked at that TRICARE seems to be using, it seems that no form of rehabilitation, let alone cognitive, but no form, physical or otherwise, would be found to be effective. So how do they defend that? I mean, is the standard just too high, what TRICARE is setting?
That's exactly what we found. Is we found that study that TRICARE was relying upon was heavily criticized by some of the top scientists in the country as being basically an impossible standard. It was a gold standard that you couldn't really rely upon to measure any therapy.
So you have a lot of independent doctors, scientists who work in this field, who have looked at this study that TRICARE commissioned essentially, and so many of them wrote letters subsequently saying the study is flawed, it was inadequate, and if you look at all the evidence in aggregate, cognitive therapy is effective. We recommend it. So what is the response from TRICARE, from the Pentagon, when they're faced with that?
Well, what our reporting found was that TRICARE's stance is we just don't have the science to back this up. And all
but
those
the science exists, though. I mean, it's not somewhere hidden away. I found it easily. Anybody could find it.
Yeah, exactly, and that was what our reporting turned up, is they were relying upon this one study when there was this mountain of other evidence to say it is effective and it does work. And I think TRICARE is proceeding cautiously, one, on the science grounds, but there's also a money issue. As you know, Sanjay, this is not a cheap treatment. It costs a lot of money, and as Paul just pointed out, there are a lot of soldiers who might be deserving of this treatment. So that would be a huge bill for the Pentagon to face, and they're aware of that.
Paul, I've read the letters from TRICARE and the Pentagon, and they say specifically money did not come into the equation here. This is not about money. That's what TRICARE says in the letters and in some of the statements they've released. What have you heard from the people that you deal with, vets directly?
Well, what we've heard is that there are a lot of folks who need care. I mean, as many as 1 in 5 folks coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan could have a traumatic brain injury. Many of them are undiagnosed, so they need this care. And if the Pentagon isn't on top of this, they should be. Secretary Gates should solve it immediately. And I hope that this interview here and the press surrounding this, and also the mobilization of the veterans community behind this, will get them to make a change quickly and permanently, so they can get these folks the care they need.
And I just got to say again, I mean, I refer patients, I think most of the doctors in my field, many fields, refer patients for cognitive therapy all the time. I was stunned to hear that there was a real concern about the adequate science here. I mean, Paul, you deal, again, directly with these vets coming home. Put a face on this for us. Are there specific stories of men and women that you've met that are going through this problem now?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Our deputy executive director has done 4 tours overseas since 9/11, and if he's around a blast, he actually got shot in the face, so he needs to be screened for traumatic brain injury, he needs to be treated for traumatic brain injury, and his family needs to be supported throughout that process. There's another key element here, Sanjay, that's overlooked. Until the Defense Appropriations Bill just passed yesterday, there was no screening for traumatic brain injury before and after deployment. So, in that flurry of legislation in Washington this week, the new defense bill will finally set up screening for every service member before and after, and I think that's going to catch a lot of folks that have been suffering with this issue and didn't even know it. It's really an invisible injury that often manifests itself in other ways over time.
And the benefits of cognitive therapy, attention, memory, ability to function with your family, all of those are significant benefits that may be harder to measure as compared to some other things in medicine, but so significant. I just want to come back, T, to this money issue again. Again, TRICARE, along with the Pentagon, has adamantly said this. I'm sure they told you the same thing. It's not about money. Have you specifically heard otherwise, that it is in some way about money?
Some of our reporting, some of the sources that we talked to, talked about being at meetings where money was a big topic of discussion. And we just recently found a letter where an assistant secretary at the Pentagon also mentioned that they basically want to get the best bang for their buck here. So money does play a role. I don't want to suggest that the Pentagon is withholding treatment to save money, but they are approaching this treatment very cautiously because they know it costs a lot of money and they want to make sure to themselves that it works.
I got to tell you, from my perspective as a neurosurgeon, as someone who's also been to Iraq and Afghanistan, I can't emphasize enough what an important issue this is. We're obviously going to continue to follow it. T. Christian Miller, Paul Rykoff, thanks so much for joining us, both of you. Happy holidays.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for having us.
Want to hear what you think as well? Join the live chat now underway at ac360.com. Still ahead, President Obama's home for the holidays.